Hi, this is Cassie Brighter, and this is Empowered Trans Woman. I'm answering a question today. I got this question and I thought it was interesting. It's from a parent, and it says, I'm a little confused. I thought transgender was a feeling and was feeling and believing that they're the opposite gender than assigned at birth. And I'm reading some posts, and parents are saying their child wants to be the opposite gender. Is that truly gender dysphoria if the child just wants to be the opposite gender? So that's the topic, and I'm going to meander a little bit, but I'm going to try to also focus on answering the question. The first thought that comes to mind, and I'm sorry, I'm a little playful when my thinking is a little playful. It goes many different places. My first thought that comes to mind is, do you know what the word kangaroo means? The word kangaroo means, I've been told this, you can fact check me, maybe I'm wrong, but the word kangaroo means I don't know. That's what the word means. It means, I don't know. Some European pointed at a kangaroo and asked a local, what is that? And the local said, kangaroo. So we all call it this thing, and all that it means is, I don't know. The other analogy that I want to spring off of is everybody knows that the big important square in front of the Kremlin in Moscow is called the Red Square. Everybody understands it to be the Red Square. But is it? And chances are it's not. And the reason why I say that is because the word for red in Russian is krasnaya. And the word for beautiful in Russian is krasnaya, because Russians like the color red. So is it krasnaya red or is it krasnaya beautiful? It's just krasnaya. And if you're a Muscovite, you understand what that word conveys. But if you're a foreigner, you might think that it means red, and you might think a political connotation, and it just means pretty. So what I'm trying to say is our language is flawed. What I'm trying to say is that we communicate with our language the best way that we can. Is transgender a feeling? Is transgender a thought? I don't know. I am left-handed. Is that a feeling that I'm left-handed? Is that a thought that I'm left-handed? How do I know that I'm left-handed? How do I prove to you that I'm left-handed? And by the way, since we're on this topic, I don't know if you knew this, but 100, 200 years ago, kids that were left-handed were penalized and were seen as social pariahs. And parents would tie their hands behind their backs to make sure that they're right-handed. So thank God that we've come so far that left-handed people are not discriminated against in society. But how do I prove to you, I mean, other than an X-ray, right? How do I prove to you that I have kidneys? Are my kidneys a feeling? How am I aware of my kidneys right now? How do I know that I have kidneys? Honestly, I don't, right? The second, I don't know whether I have kidneys or not. They're not acting up. I'm not feeling them. But you know what? I've had kidney stones in the past, and I can tell you for a fact, I have kidneys. If somebody were to punch me in the kidney, I would know that I've been hurt in the kidney because there it is. But right this second, as I sit here, I have absolutely no idea whether or not I have kidneys, and I don't know where they are because I'm not necessarily feeling them. So is transgender feeling? Is it a thought? Is it bigger than a bread box? I don't know. We're trying to use language to express something that's hard to convey with language. You just know you're left-handed because doing something with your right hand feels stupid and unintuitive and complicated, and doing it with your left hand comes easy to you. And so because of that, you gravitate towards, well, duh, this feels better. And when people insist, no, you should use your right hand, it's just, ugh, I guess I don't want to. And that's kind of the way gender manifests, at least for me, in the fact that boy things, generally speaking, were just, do I have to? Now, how do I convey that? How do I convey that as a child? Some kids convey that by firmly pointing to a Barbie and saying, this is me. And I'm talking about transgender girls. The same applies to, of course, to non-binary and to trans boys. I'm using analogies here, bear with me. But let's suppose in the case of a trans girl, maybe at 3 years old, she'll grab a doll and she'll say, this is what I am. Or she'll point to her sister and say, that's what I am. And she'll be insistent in her affirmations that she's a girl. That's her journey. And it really depends on your environment. It depends on what signals you get from the environment. If you have that kind of open communication with your parents, chances are you're going to be a lot more forthcoming with this kind of information. I didn't grow up in this environment. I grew up in an environment where it was very, very told to me, in no uncertain terms was it expressed to me that I am a boy. I understood that very clearly. Those were the mandates from above. And so I grew up thinking that I really wished I was a girl. And I grew up thinking that it's a shame that I'm not a girl. And I grew up sad about it and wistful and looking at girls with envy. I couldn't imagine pointing to myself and saying I'm a girl, because I would understand that in the context of my time, in the context of Buenos Aires, in those years, in my chauvinistic household, I understood that it would just not go over well. And I didn't even conceive of it. When I was 11 years old, I remember going to Brazil on vacation, and on the tabloid in Brazil, there was a picture of a girl who was transitioning really early. I think she was transitioning at 18, which was very controversial at the time. And the tabloids were making, of course, a big sensationalistic feast out of it. But I remember pausing at 11 and looking at that with such longing and such. It's the first time that it occurred to me that this would be possible for a person. But of course, not in my case. Of course, not in my house. Of course, not with my parents, and not in the country that I lived. So I grew up thinking that I wish I was a girl. When I started transitioning, I thought of it quite often as the process of transitioning from male to female, which is kind of the stereotype that's been handed down to us since the 50s, since the days of Jorgensen. A lot of people don't think about it that way anymore. When I compare my psyche and my inner life and my thoughts to boys that I knew, I can easily tell that I was a girl all along. That just wasn't my language. So we're using different language today. Same thing with non-binary folk. Non-binary folk 20 years, 30 years ago might have been content identifying or explaining to the world that they're a butch lesbian, because that was the closest equivalent to expressing the feeling that they had. And there was no space in language, there was no space in culture to say, I am neither, I don't belong in that group and I don't belong in that group. And you find people like Polly Mori or several other figures in society who very clearly are in this androgynous kind of ambiguous space. And you could easily think, I mean, Amelia Earhart, for example, it would have been interesting to have a conversation about gender with Amelia Earhart. I don't want to digress too much. So is it a feeling? Is it a thought? And I don't think that it's either. I think that it's a very strong innate understanding of oneself. How do I know that I'm left-handed? I don't know if there's any kind of test that I could prove. You could always say that I'm intentionally making my right hand clumsier. I don't know how I would be able to prove it to you, but I know it within the shadow of a doubt. It would be easier for me to do this with my left hand. It would be easier for me to do this than with my right hand. And by the way, I've had an interesting conversation with my 13-year-old daughter, who is left-handed, but has no problem learning to play guitar with the right hand because she writes with the left, but some hand activities come easier to her with her right hand. So, and that, oh my God, that's an interesting analogy for the nuances of gender, because people are all different. I want to tackle some of the comments that this post has elicited. So, somebody said, some people still get gender and sex confused when discussing issue as well. And by the way, it's not just gender and sex. In this case, it's gender, biology, which I think, at least in my case, I'm shying away from calling it sex anymore. It's physiology, it's gonadal component, it's chromosomal components, it's anatomy. So gender, anatomy, and then there's presentation or gender expression. So when I thought of I would rather be a girl. Well, I wasn't so much talking as I would like to change the way that I think and feel about myself in order to adopt the psychic presence of a girl. I already had that inherently in me. What I was trying to say by I wish I was a girl is I wish that I could take on the gender expression. In other words, the clothing, the makeup, the mannerisms, the social um, behaviors in society that girls typically have because that felt more comfortable for me to inhabit. So that's gender expression. By the way, we never really add gender norms to it, but gender norms play a part of it too. Girls are the ones washing the dishes, boys are the ones going to work and earning a living, girls are the ones taking care of the household. We have largely dismantled that. Nowadays, women can pilot F-16s, men can stay home and be house husbands or nurses or um, kindergarten teachers. Women can be architects and engineers. We've dismantled largely the idea of gender norms. There's still men holding doors for women. There's still the guy picks up the check at the end of the day. Luckily, all that is shifting. It's definitely shifted dramatically in queer culture. In queer culture, a lot of that's more pliable. Something wonderful about queer culture is that we have constant conversations about these topics, which yields really good epiphanies and really good learnings. And I wish that was happening more and more in conventional and heteronormic in mainstream society as well. But yes, gender and sex are different things. Gender is an innate sense of self along the gender lines, and what we usually refer to as sex is a few components. It's anatomy, it's chromosomes, it's gonads, which by gonads I mean genitals, but that doesn't determine gender. And here's a disconnect, which is in the 98% of cases, gender and sex are married. They come out well hitched from the womb in a new baby. But there's the occasional quirk, there's the occasional exception, and intersex folk are an exception, and trans and non-binary folk are an exception. And there's also several other unique cases of gender and sex combination, which I'm not going to go into in detail because I'm trying to keep this short, but they do exist. So infrequent doesn't mean illegitimate. Blue eyes are less frequent than brown eyes, but blue eyes are not illegitimate. So there's a mother that talks about, I knew something was off. And she's talking about her child, and they say they were never boyish. They took cues from girls. And then eventually they announced themselves as transgender. So it's a process. It has a lot to do with what do you know, what's available in society. If I'm trying to, I don't know, if I'm trying to stir soup and I send you to the store looking for an implement that would stir soup, and I don't know the word ladle, or I don't know that wooden spoons exist, what would I would ask you to find a big spoon. I would ask you to find I don't know. Do you see what I mean? I would struggle with language because language just isn't there. Assigned male at birth. That's a term that really well defines because some parents are referring to their kids as FTM or as MTF. FTM stands for female to male, and MTF stands for male to female. And I generally discourage parents and discourage folk to from using those terms to define a person. MTF was a quick shorthand that medical folk used for describing the medical transition process. But there's so many flaws connected with that very simplistic stereotype. If we accept and if we acknowledge that a transgender woman was never, in fact, a male, then MTF is faulty analogy, faulty terminology. But also, MTF is a process. It's a process of becoming. It's wrong to assign that to a person because a person is not a process. A person was and is what they are. So assigned male at birth is something that's been used more currently, or assigned female at birth, that defines, so that's how we were perceived when we were born, even though it wasn't 100% accurate. I'm going to mention a couple more things before I let it go. Yeah, then there's the case of people who never expressed anything. So, and this is something I recently produced, wrote a post about. Your child never gave you any signs. And in my case, I'm going to rant here for a second, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions at your parenting. I don't know your parenting as I make this video. I'm projecting, I'm talking about my journey. But in my case, there were never any signs. Yeah, because I really carefully avoided any signs, because otherwise I knew I would be ridiculed, I would be laughed at, I would be punished. So no, there weren't any signs. I understood full well what a sissy was, and I understood that I couldn't inhabit that persona. And if I raised my hand and said I'm a sissy, then good things wouldn't happen. Secondly, there were so many signs. Oh my God, there were so many signs that I was a girl. From the tea set that I really wanted for my birthday when I was 9, to the dolls I played it, to the glittery stickers that I collected, to the fact that all my friends when I was a child were girls, to on and on and on. But nobody was looking for that. It was a different era, for one thing, but also parents really, really like to hope for the cis heteronormative child. So quite often it's a blindness. It's like not looking. And then, you know, there's a saying that I really like: when you hear hoof sounds, you don't think zebras, you think horses. So even myself, as I started understanding myself more and more and more, I kept thinking about sexuality. I kept thinking, I'm probably a gay man. And then I started having sex with gay men, and they just really didn't like to have sex with me because I was too feminine. Several commented about it, and I didn't really enjoy the experience because man-to-man sex is not something that appeals to me. It became, over time, more and more understood to me what the hell I am. But for me, it took longer. And part of it is generational. Kids nowadays are more informed. They have a lot of YouTube tutorials. They have a lot of access to a lot of information that can inform them. Now, I really, really doubt, if you're concerned, I really, really doubt a kid would raise their hand and say, hey, I'm trans. Because why? Like, what's there to gain? Why would you raise your hand for this? It's a hard journey, and it's not a journey of privilege. It's not attention seeking. The kind of attention that you get when you're a kid and you raise your hand and you say that you're trans is not the kind of attention any kid really is hoping for. I'm speaking in general terms, and you might feel free to comment if I'm out of line. But what I'm trying to say is, I can't imagine a situation where a kid would say, this is what I want to ascribe to myself, just for the attention. I think it's ludicrous. So no, a YouTube video is not going to turn your kid gay. A YouTube video is not going to turn your kid trans. I'm going to end this video here because I don't want it to go on too long. Feel free to write comments. And then I'm just going to address the comments, and I'm going to wrap it up here.